Chapter 14, Little Red Wagon. It's a sad day for us, Clyde told the Seamonts when they were returning to the United States. I'm really going to miss you, Bob, and Ellen too. The men's age difference was enough to be that of father and son, but they had worked together like brothers. Back in the States, Bob Seamont told how God employed mission aviation to reach people in the jungles of Peru. Soon the General Conference began authorizing the use of planes in other parts of the world. One day they asked Bob, what is the most economical way to get 2 airplanes to missions in Africa? He started figuring, I can fly a plane to Africa for less than it costs to build a shipping crate, and that's only the beginning. Other expenses will include disassembly, freight to the port, ocean freight, and reassembly at the destination. Commercial shipping company bids came to $10,000 per plane, and the process would take several months. Bob assured the General Conference officers that he could transport the planes to Africa for about $2,500 each. Church leaders liked the idea and asked him to find another experienced pilot to help him ferry the planes across the Atlantic. Working his ham radio one sultry evening at the airbase in Yurinacocha, Clyde Peters connected with Bob Seamont in the States via phone patch. Before going off the air, Bob said, By the way, Clyde, could you help me? I've been asked to take 2 planes to Africa. Will you fly one of them? You've been listening, Eleanor, Clyde turned to his wife. Will it be okay with you? Eleanor, with a gleam in her eyes, questioned, Fly over the Atlantic? She hesitated. I suppose it's alright if you want to take the risk. At least you'll be doing it for God. Back on the radio, Clyde said, I just got the green light from Eleanor. It's a deal. I'll be glad to fly one of the planes across the Atlantic to Africa. The 2 men finalized plans, and church leaders in South America, welcoming the opportunity to help missions in Africa, approved the trip for Clyde. Since he didn't have a lot of baggage, he told his children, This is a perfect chance to take some jungle animals to the States. He flew to Lima with 2 monkeys, an ocelot, and a carton with 10 baby snakes. Checking into a hotel, he fed the animals and fell asleep. About 1 in the morning, his phone rang insistently. Finally, he woke up enough to pick up the receiver. Senor Peters, an urgent voice spoke. Your snakes are escaping! Clyde knocked a few things over trying to find the light switch. He looked in the snake carton. No snakes, not one. Opening the door of his room, Clyde saw 3 terrified hotel attendants holding a broom and dustpan tied to long handles. From 15 feet away, they tried to sweep the baby snakes into the dustpan. The ruckus started when one of the snakes crawled into another hotel's guest room. Attendants cringed when Clyde reached down and picked up the harmless baby boa constrictors. After putting all 10 snakes back in the box, he taped it shut and made a couple of small holes so the tiny creatures could breathe but not escape. Early in the morning, Clyde and his mingery boarded a flight for San Antonio, Texas. Burning inside, he tried not to show his anger when U.S. Customs agents confiscated the ocelot, Timmy, a longtime family pet. Fortunately, they passed the monkeys and snakes. Bob met Clyde and immediately they went to work preparing for the flight to Africa. Early on a Friday morning, 2 new mission planes lifted slowly from a Florida airport and headed out over the Caribbean. Bob flew the Cessna 185 and Clyde piloted the Cessna 182. Each carried its pilots, 200 gallons of fuel, and about 500 pounds of gear, including a 2-person inflatable life raft. Clyde watched cotton candy clouds float over the blue Caribbean. This is a gorgeous day, he chatted with Bob on the radio. The air is really smooth. Looking down, he added, there's a lot of water below us, but I do see an island here and there. What will it be like over the Atlantic with only water and no islands? The pilots tested their fuel systems by using a hand pump to keep the right wing tank full. On Friday afternoon, they landed at Port of Spain, Trinidad, and stayed with the Adventist pastor. The next morning, they worshipped at church where it seemed as if all 800 members shook their hands when they arrived for Sabbath school and then another 800 times after the services. With 1,600 handshakes, they couldn't have felt more welcome. When the church members discovered the 2 men would cross the Atlantic to deliver mission planes to Africa, one man stood up at announcement time and stated, I think we should declare a day of fasting and prayer on the day these brethren cross the ocean. How many are in favor? 800 hands went up. Actually, 802 because Clyde and Bob raised their hands too. Clyde nudged the older pilot. We are blessed to know 800 of our brothers and sisters will be praying for our Atlantic flight. He appreciated all the warmth and encouragement, but inside he felt a strange chill. Emotions similar to those he had gone through on his first solo flight or his first jump with a parachute. On Sunday, they flew past Guyana, Suriname, and French Guyana, then down the coast of Brazil, landing at Belém near the mouth of the Amazon. In spite of bad weather with a forced landing at Fort Zala, they arrived in Recife, Brazil about 10:30 a.m. on Tuesday. Immediately, they began checking their engines to make sure everything was in perfect condition for an ocean crossing. Clyde radioed Eleanor at the airbase in Peru. Everything's fine. We're having a great trip and the airplanes are performing well. But the truth was that he didn't feel good at all. The unknowns of flight across the Atlantic weighed heavily on his mind. By mid-afternoon, they finished servicing the engines and filled the gas tanks to maximum capacity. Clyde looked at the planes and shook his head. With all the weight, the landing gear spread out and the tires appeared to be half flat. Both Cessnas sat back on their tail skid and the nose wheel didn't reach the ground. Wanting to leave by sundown, they pushed into the airport office to file a flight plan. The officer looked at their documents. Africa? Single-engine planes are not allowed to cross the South Atlantic from Brazil. Did you say no Atlantic crossing? Clyde leaned forward. Sir, these are new planes. We have top-of-the-line radio equipment, including VHF, and all the en route frequencies. In addition, we're carrying life rafts in case of an emergency and have plenty of fuel. The official called the chief commander from the Brazilian Air Force. I have 2 men here with single-engine planes. They say they've got to cross the Atlantic tonight. He explained the situation. After a long conversation, he turned to Clyde and Bob. Sorry, we don't accept single-engine flights over the Atlantic. Not from Brazil. Clyde looked at Bob Seamont. I'm already tired of flying. We spent 12 hours crossing the Caribbean, 10 hours to Belém, and another 10 to get to Recife. It will cost our mission in Africa a fortune if we fly back to the States, up over Greenland, then down across Spain and onto Africa. We don't have money for this. I know, Clyde, Bob said, but we don't have a choice. The officials started closing the office. Leading the men out, he locked the doors. I'll see you tomorrow. You're not going anywhere tonight. Our backs are really against the wall now, Clyde thought. He leaned against the building and started to pray. These planes are for your work in Africa, Lord. You know our concerns about this trip, but you brought us this far. Please work out your will for our flight. Inside the office, the phone started ringing. The aviation officer was already more than 100 feet away. Sir, your phone is ringing, Clyde called after him. I'll take care of it tomorrow, he answered. It might be important. The Brazilian turned and grudgingly walked back to the office. The phone kept ringing and ringing. Although he fumbled with a bunch of keys before he could open the door, the phone persisted. Slowly, he headed to his desk and threw his keys across the top. Instead of reaching for the phone, he walked around the desk. Who would call after office hours and let the phone ring so long? Clyde asked Bob. The way this guy's fooling around, it's going to stop ringing before he answers. Finally, the officer picked up the phone. Yes, they're still here. Do you want to talk to them? The man handed the phone to Peters. This is the Commander General for Brazil's Air Force. Why did you fellows fly to Brazil planning to cross the Atlantic? The voice asked. We need to take 2 planes to our mission in Africa. We had no idea that Brazil has restrictions for crossing with single-engine planes. If we'd known, we would have taken the northern route over Greenland. I don't know why I'm doing this, but I'm going to make an exception. Since you have 2 planes equipped with life rafts, both with VHF radio equipment and en route frequencies, I'm going to authorize your flight plan. Thank you, sir, Clyde breathed. Don't ever come here again with a single-engine plane and think you can fly from Brazil to Africa. We won't allow it. Now let me talk to the officer. Clyde walked to the corner where Seamont prayed. Bob, the commander asked to talk with the flight officer. They both listened as the Brazilian said, yes, okay, it's a deal, okay, and hung up. The official stamped and signed the flight plan documents and handed copies to the men. Guess I won't see you tomorrow. Have a good flight. The 2 pilots walked out toward their airplanes. Clyde poked Bob. I saw you over there praying. I've been praying too. To be truthful, I've been very concerned about making this flight. You're not alone, Seamont admitted. My mind's filled with visions of everything that could go wrong over the Atlantic. What just happened gives me faith God will be with us, Clyde replied. First they tell us we couldn't cross the Atlantic from Brazil. We pray and the commander from Brazil's Air Force calls back after business hours and lets the phone ring and ring and ring. God is surely good, Bob answered. It's a miracle as far as I'm concerned. No one ever lets a phone ring so long. The Holy Spirit had to work on that man's mind for him to do this. And the local officer here, he didn't want to go back to the office, but he did. With new confidence, the Adventist missionary pilots climbed into their planes, cranked the engines, and lumbered down the runway. Heavily loaded with fuel, it took 3 hours to reach 8,000 feet elevation. Glad you're along, Clyde, Bob radioed later. Clyde reached for his microphone. I'm delighted to be with you, Bob. How's the Cessna 185 doing? Great, the engine is performing its best. Looks like I will keep busy though, using the hand pump to keep transferring fuel into the right wing tank. Yeah, Clyde came back on. The pump has given me plenty of exercise, but this Cessna 182 is running great. The smooth air tonight is marvelous. About 6 hours of clear, smooth flying, Bob and Clyde entered clouds and started flying on instruments. They had flown side by side. Now they separated with Bob in the lead, 15 miles ahead. Both pilots worked to keep on the correct heading. Clyde's eyes stayed glued to his compass. Boy, we're right on the money. He thought about the words of David. Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. Psalms 119:105. Living for the Lord is just like flying. You've got to keep your heading. And if you ever get off course, you better let Jesus help you back on. Maintaining a heading in smooth clouds proved easy, but about 12 hours they encountered thunderstorms that lasted for 6 solid hours. I've never seen a storm like this, Clyde thought. The turbulence is awesome. Heavy rain pelted the planes. They've been flying steadily at 8,000 feet. Now thermal updrafts and downdrafts tossed the tiny planes around like leaves. Clyde looked at his altimeter in disbelief. 18,000 feet? Suddenly the engine stopped dead. The Cessna 182 has a carburetor with a paper filter. Heavy rain had plugged it with water. Clyde quickly pulled the carburetor heat. To his relief, the engine came back to life. 10 minutes later, he glanced at the altimeter. Only 4,000 feet? Another updraft caught the plane, lifted it to 14,000 feet. 6 times the engine stopped. Each time, adrenaline shot through his body. I won't worry, Clyde determined. When Brazil's Air Force commander called the Recife airport after closing time and let the phone ring and ring, there can be no doubt that God approved this flight. Life has its turbulence, but if we cling to Jesus, He will see us through. The fuel injection system on the Cessna 185 allows air to enter from inside the engine, avoiding filter problems. This saved Bob the emotional strain of having his engine quit every few minutes. Both pilots kept setting their compasses, trying to hold a steady heading, but rough air caused extreme difficulty. Lightning filled their headsets with crackling noises when they tried to talk to each other on the radio. They'd been in the air 18 hours, the last 6 in an incredible tropical storm. When they at last flew out of the storm, the blue Atlantic spread out below. Bob Seamont, 30 miles ahead, could see the coast of West Africa. They were 35 miles off course and made the necessary correction. Bob was landing when Clyde got him on the radio. I've arranged with a ham radio operator in New York to make a phone pass to General Conference headquarters. Bob Seamont just landed in Africa and he reported to church leaders. I'm on a 3-mile final leg into Monrovia, Libya. God has taken both planes safely across the Atlantic. On the ground at last, Clyde crawled out of his plane. Bob sat there with the door of the 185 open. In all my years of flying, I've never been in weather like we just came through, Seamont said. They photographed both planes to record where the severe rain had chewed away the paint right down to the bare metal on the leading edge of the wings, struts, spinner, and nose cowlings. The tired men walked away with their suitcases, leaving the airplane doors wide open. Halfway to a hotel, Clyde remembering them, returning, they locked the planes. Clyde slumped down in the back seat of the taxi. You know that statement, Bob, we have nothing to fear for the future except as we should forget the way the Lord has led us in the past? God took care of us today. We can sure trust Him tomorrow. They learned that a Boeing 707 jet left Brazil about the same time they did and arrived 2 hours late in Dakar because of the severe storm. I'm really thankful, Clyde said, for the faith of the church members in Trinidad who spent the day of our flight in fasting and prayer. Yes, and while we were being tossed around for 6 hours in terrible turbulence, I kept thinking about the providential approval of our flight back in Recife. Africa stretched out ahead as they flew on and on. The Ivory Coast, Nigeria, Angola, mist rising from Victoria Falls. Before reaching Salisbury, now Harare in Zimbabwe, Clyde and Bob saw herds of wild elephants stampeding on the ground below. At the Salusi mission, they delivered the Cessna 185 flown by Bob. Together in the 182, they went on to Malamu mission. At a dedication service for the new plane, they invited Bob Seamont to speak. For me, it's the dream of a lifetime to be able to deliver a plane to Malamu, Seamont said. As a small boy, I wanted a little red wagon more than anything else. My parents were poor, so I worked and saved for my wagon. Every time I earned some money, I gave my tithe and offering and put the rest in a little bank to go toward the red wagon. When I was about to buy the wagon, a missionary visited my church. He told how God blessed the work at Malamu Leper Hospital and how Malamu Mission needed funds to expand its work. After the meeting, I went home, opened my bank, and brought the money back to the church. I gave it all for Malamu. No red wagon for me. Malamu Mission and God's work were more important. Now that I've seen your mission, I know that was one of the best investments I ever made. I thank God for the privilege of joining you and dedicating your new mission plane. May it serve as a tool to help you win many for Christ. Bob, Clyde says they prepared to leave. You just helped me understand why you gave some of the best years of your life to mission aviation, the Upper Amazon mission in Peru. Since boyhood, you've been putting others first. The flight with Bob, ferrying planes over the Atlantic to Africa, increased Clyde's faith in God. When all of the bills were paid, including the airline tickets home, it had cost just $2,300 per plane. Each mission saved more than $7,500 and received their planes much sooner than if they had shipped them as ocean freight. Continue listening.